Reasonableness doesn't seem like too much to ask. I always kind of looked at reasonableness as being similar to common sense. In fact, one of the definitions of reasonableness is being within the bounds of common sense. Of course, you've probably heard the saying, common sense isn't. And I don't think common sense isn't as much as it is different to different people. My idea of common sense might be different than your idea of common sense. It seems to me that it used to be easier to define common sense. These days it seems it seems harder to agree on what common sense is. Of course, these days we seem to have trouble agreeing on what facts are, what truth is. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a sign of the time, or maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's a thing of aging. Common sense to somebody my age, 75, is probably going to be different than the idea of what common sense is to somebody that's 25. Does that sound reasonable? I guess that sounds reasonable. And I think where common sense and reasonableness part ways a little bit is, if I can explain this right, I think you can use reasonableness when common sense differs between people. You know, it requires a certain amount of empathy, a certain amount of seeing things from the other person's point of view, compromising a little bit. And two reasonable people can disagree on something. Differing ideas can both be reasonable. It can be reasonable to think a certain way even if you disagree with it. I mean, it's possible to understand somebody's reasoning and disagree with it. Am I repeating myself? And over the past few years, reasonableness and common sense seems to have gone haywire for a lot of people in my age group, the boomer generation. It seems like we've lost sight of common sense and reasonableness in a lot of ways. I mean, my common sense tells me you shouldn't act like that. You shouldn't dress like that in public. And it's not just the youngsters, it's the oldsters too. I don't know if you watched the inauguration of the U.S. president here with Congressman John Fetterman shows up in shorts and a hoodie to the presidential inauguration. That doesn't seem reasonable to me. And look at Jeff Bezos' girlfriend or fiancée or whatever she is. You know, common sense to me says you don't dress like that at a presidential inauguration. Apparently, she felt differently. He felt differently. So, and these days it's hard to follow the science when you're talking about something too, because the science differs. Whose science do you want to follow? Or whose science are you going to follow? Science is not an exact science. And I think it's helpful sometimes when something seems unreasonable to ask for an explanation or offer an explanation if somebody thinks you're being unreasonable. Sometimes an explanation helps it feel more reasonable. And it seems to me these days that there's an awful lot of unreasonableness going on without enough explanation. And it's all very confusing to me. I think I'm going to go take a nap now. Talk amongst yourselves. Peace and joy, and be reasonable.